I think our audiovisual technician is going to get more than a workout here today, running back and forth if we keep this up. But thanks to all of the various keynote speakers for their introductory remarks for the meeting. During my opening remarks just a few minutes ago, I talked about the need to ensure that our drug safety system, our pharmacovigilance processes, are actually keeping up with our efforts to accelerate drug development. I think it's fair to say keeping up probably isn't good enough, as we just heard from Kieran. The challenges are great. And the truth is we need to do better overall, not just keep up. The statistics that I cited earlier from the FDA report that was issued in 2014 stated that during this period of acceleration, the commitment of the agency to safety and strict standards and all had not been compromised in any way. There was one sentence in the entire multiple-page report that used the word safety in any way, which I thought was very interesting, because if you look at the actual data, it turns out there's actually a real basis for some concern that characterization that nothing may have been compromised may not be entirely accurate. In fact, the data that was released by the agency in 2014 shows that the number of withdrawals and recalls of drugs during that same 2013-2014 period, the exact same time that they were doing the acceleration of medicines, it's very interesting. It turns out that during that period, that 2-year period, the recalls were almost equal to the number of recalls that occurred during the preceding decade. Okay, so in 2 years, you basically have the same incidence of recalls. And I mean, that's over 2,000 recalls in a period of less than 2 years, which is absolutely unprecedented. The vast majority of those recalls were in fact Class 1 and Class 2 safety-related recalls. They weren't just taking things off because they didn't work or whatever. In fact, during the sort of the modern era here, since the mid-1970s, there are over 36 marketed, approved drugs in wide use that have been completely removed from the market because of serious safety issues. Some of those drugs had actually been on the market utilized in large populations for over 30 years. You have to ask yourself, how is it possible that a drug could be on the market used by millions of people for years and there not be an analysis to reveal that in fact there were safety concerns that actually led to removal of the drug from markets? So it's not clear, as I said, that we are keeping up, and in fact I think we do need to do better. Obviously it's difficult to pinpoint the reasons for all of these recalls, but I think there are several factors that may contribute. To be fair, during that particular 2-year period, there was a great surge in concern, not so much over manufacturing, but over compounding of various agents that actually fell sort of on the margins of the FDA's overall responsibility, drugs being compounded in centers where there were challenges around bacterial contamination, adulteration, counterfeiting, and so on. A good example being the heparin chondroitin sulfate, and where drugs were being imported that in fact didn't have in them what they were supposed to have in them, but there was no good way to tell that apparently. Another factor that I already mentioned was the lower number and narrower focus of the clinical trials that are actually being used to support drug approvals. Both of those circumstances make it more likely that a drug would be approved for marketing with less compelling evidence and certainly less experience than one would otherwise have with the drug before it goes to market, which would enhance the likelihood that broader experience would result in recognition of signals that had not previously been detected. We also know that despite the changes in regulatory requirements around post-marketing surveillance trials, particularly for safety and effectiveness. Many of those, and of course mandatory reporting of adverse drug reactions and events, many of those studies simply do not get done because we've created a process in which there are actually no financial incentives to do those trials if you happen to be the sponsor. And in fact, there's a disincentive to do the trials because once the drug's on the market, if you can not come up with bad news, it can stay on the market. And so we've created a system that actually disincentivizes the process that we really want to do. And that's not a very effective way to approach things. It's not thinking about the overall system's implications of what we're doing. And the adverse event reporting process that we have is hardly robust. In fact, I would say it barely works, if at all. I mean, I've been practicing medicine now for over 40 years, and I use drugs I do anesthesia for heart and major vascular surgery, and I use multiple drugs every day. I've never filed more than one med alert adverse event report in that entire time, and I know many physicians are no better than that. When these events are reported, they end up in electronic health records or paper records more commonly. But no matter where they end up in patients' medical records, they are often not shared. They don't get recognized within the process. They're hidden behind walls of bureaucracy and other legal security that renders them almost inaccessible for the kinds of safety analyses that would actually benefit the broader population. And these challenges are not limited really to the post-marketing domain. Even if we look at the clinical trials process, which ought to have the most robust monitoring and surveillance for safety signals, the simple truth is that it doesn't work nearly as well as it should. Because much of the safety data is really not comprehensively analyzed until the time of a new drug application submission. And as Briggs Morrison, the former chief medical officer for AstraZeneca, put it, during much of the clinical trials process, we're actually flying blind. We just don't know where we are, what's happening with respect to safety until we get down to the actual closure of the trial, because of this lack of integration of the various databases, even though the technical capabilities for doing it are immediately available. It's just that somehow we neither have the will nor the way to actually pull it together. And ironically, as well as curiously, this situation is contemporaneous, okay, with the drive for more effective, more sensible processes around like risk-based monitoring and other approaches, particularly the application of new multivariate statistical approaches and artificial intelligence algorithms driven by our technologies that would enable us to be far more effective, to truly find a needle in a haystack and act upon it before people are harmed. And going a step further, with the advances in computer technology and massive data sharing capabilities, we're really on the era, the dawn of being able to use high-performance computing with these massive data sets to do not just pharmacovigilance, real-time pharmacovigilance, but predictive pharmacovigilance, to be able to look at genomics and health records and records around drug safety and physiology and be able to predict what is likely to happen in a bad way before it actually occurs, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it, but that's probably where we really ought to be. So we're in this situation where it's increasingly obvious that the advances in technology, biology, genomics, toxicology, statistics, all of these can come together in a way that we should have a far more sophisticated and effective safety model. But the question that we're faced with is, how can we realize that dream? How can we get there? And I think part of the problem that was alluded to by all of the introductory speakers is that we haven't yet moved toward the adoption in the pharmaceutical industry of a true safety culture as we have in many other industries. So this needs to be the overriding, the umbrella under which all of our comments focus today. But I think that if we're going to try and understand this and look for solutions, we need to consider this situation in the sort of the broader landscape of this ecosystem. And I'm going to, over the next few minutes, talk a little bit about this and at least throw out, or stimulating your imagination, some ways in which we may be able to get to this sort of new model for the future. The entire ecosystem of drug development is one that's very complex, and as we already said, it's changing in dramatic ways under the force of a number of changes that are occurring across that ecosystem, whether it's in healthcare, science, biology, and all. So we recognize that the system that we have had in place needs to change if we truly expect to keep up. Because what we have today is basically the same approach that was put into place back in the early 1960s after the thalidomide horror that Karen already spoke to. And that process has fundamentally remained unchanged for the last 50 years. And it obviously can't be called a system for a number of reasons, but we have now a perceived crisis. We have a recognition of the fact that in terms of economics and pipelines and safety and engagement of patients, the whole works, that we have truly a crisis, and that's an opportunity for change, and we need to take advantage of that opportunity because what we have is really not working. So there's an opportunity to take this highly fragmented, siloed environment that we have created, driven by the proprietary concerns on the one hand and the regulatory concerns on the other. We can now say these are causing impediments to progress, and we need to look at them differently. So we have an opportunity to move from these we call cylinders of excellence instead of silos to actual more effective systems. If we begin to apply the principles of systems engineering to the endeavor of drug development, we can think of it in terms of what constitutes a system. And any enterprise system has three critical elements: people, processes, and technology that allows them to work together in an interoperable way, that cannot be achieved if they're all in their own little silos. If we apply this fundamental systems thinking to the drug development process, we can envision a very simple environment that would be a network, a global network of accredited clinical research sites, all meeting certain specifications that we know how they're going to perform, how they interconnect, and so on. Professionally trained, certified workers, so we know what they're capable of, what their competencies are. Those can be connected using an information technology platform that could support a very robust quality and risk management system, safety system. And of course, once you have the network in place of sites connecting all the various players, you actually can promote the adoption of standards and standardized policies and procedures to make it all work with higher connectivity, interoperability, and of course reliability as you go forward. Now, there's nothing novel about this thinking. Obviously, other industries have done it very well for a long time and benefited tremendously. The airline industry is one example where, more than 50 years ago, the airlines said, look, if we're going to have a global endeavor, let's look at what we have to do and how we're going to accomplish it. They looked at every element of their industry and said, what is the desired outcome? That we truly want to have an optimal performance of the entire air transportation system. We have certain things to work with. We have certain desired outputs. Let's see how we can make that work. And they did it. And today we don't even stop to think about the fact that we can buy an airline ticket in Boston and we can fly to Paris before we come to London or on to Singapore or whatever. And all of that happens in the background with one reservation system, one financial management system, one baggage handling system, one air traffic control process. It all works together, and we don't even have to stop and think about it. Well, what would happen if we began to think about that for the pharmaceutical industry, the drug development process? We know that we have multiple players around the entire process, all of which must interact in order to be able to get the job done. We have, just like the airlines, a number of things that we're going to put into this in terms of the protocols. We've got all the various pieces that go into actually getting clinical research done. And we need to get out data, we need to have safety, quality information, and ultimately we want to be able to get down to the big goal of improving people's lives and so on. Now, within this framework, we also have a complex environment of people, all doing different jobs. Some of them do them very well, but it's embarrassing that clinical research is the one area of medicine in which there are no standards or requirements for physician investigators. They don't exist. The only thing you have to do, in the U.S., for instance, is to be able to write your name on a 1572 to say that you're qualified to do it, which isn't a very high standard. And in fact, many of the so-called investigators are probably better characterized as hobbyists. They're doing this without any kind of real professional training or experience that we require for every other aspect of medicine. But I won't get off on a tangent there. We also have a host of processes. This is a complex ecosystem, but the ultimate goal is to optimize clinical trials performance in order to achieve the various outputs. And so if we begin to think about that, applying systems engineering principles, we can see what a systems-focused clinical research enterprise might look like. And of course, that's what the organization that we've created, ACRES, the Alliance for Clinical Research Excellence and Safety, is doing. And I have to tell you just a little bit about that so that you can understand it. This is not an advertisement, because ACRES is a nonprofit organization operating in the public interest. It's a multi-stakeholder alliance where all of these various stakeholder groups are working together to build a shared open global system to support this critically important process, and in doing so, actually align good ethical principles and professionalism with good business, scientific, and medical practices within a broad safety culture. So it's not just about improving efficiency in clinical trials. It's truly about doing trials well in order to fulfill the broader goals. I'm not going to take the time to tell you all about them, but there are more than 26 different projects that are currently underway. But the analysis that have been conducted, or analyses that have been conducted within the Alliance, have basically focused on what we identify as the 4 critical operational areas within drug development and clinical trials, which includes, of course, the sites, as we've talked about, the information systems, and then the need for maintaining quality, continuously improving quality, as well as to focus on safety and pharmacovigilance. Much of this focuses on the quality and productivity, as well as sustainability of clinical research sites. We've never recognized the essential resource that high-quality sites provide, and so we need to do a much better job there. The simple fact is we don't have a very good situation with respect to sites. 70% of them will never do more than 1 clinical trial in their entire business lifetime. They're one and done, they're gone. Many sites are still using paper. In the face of having EDC and CTMS systems around. It's like riding a bicycle in the age of jets in order to get across the ocean. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But that's the way it is. We waste an enormous amount of money on monitoring and so on. You know the litany. But this results in an enormous amount of waste. So just to give you an example of how we've approached this, how do we ensure that sites are going to be interoperable, that they're going to operate professionally, that they're going to be able to achieve a certain measure of quality, that they have the right technologies in place? Well, we develop a system for accreditation. It's like the rules for connecting your laptop to an enterprise computer. A site that will connect to the network needs to meet certain criteria. By developing an effective system for accreditation that has standards that are derived by the multiple user community, that are practical, that are in fact used to derive metrics that can actually be used to monitor performance and so on, that you do it in such a way that it provides value, rewards rather than burdens, and that it's fair and open, you create something that truly has value to the entire community. So that accreditation is one of the activities that are underway. The ICHR Site Accreditation Standards Initiative, a global process, was started back in 2013. It's moving forward. We're now down to we've empowered the global working group. This development of the initial version of standards are underway. We expect to have those by 2015, to begin pilot testing in 2016, with the implementation of the first round of accreditation sometime in 2016 or 2017. But by doing that, we work toward building a sustainable systems infrastructure that will in fact support not only quality and efficiency, but safety and thing. And the initiatives that are underway look at all of the fundamental challenges that the endeavor is facing, okay, and addresses them in a comprehensive, integrated way. Okay, we have to understand that monitoring and pharmacovigilance and ethical review, all of these things are interconnected. And it's only if we can take advantage of understanding how they're interconnected and what the impact of changing one will do on the other parts that we can, that's the only way we'll be able to truly achieve the goals. But there are enormous benefits that come from this. And if one looks only at the economic end of it, this is a $70 billion a year enterprise, clinical trials. And the estimates are conservative estimates that is 20% waste. So I'm going to just jump ahead in the interest of time and focus on this comment of Briggs Morrison that we're flying blind. One of the reasons that we're flying blind is that all of the information that we truly need is now existent in several different foundation platforms, so that the personal health and genomic information, others exist one place, the actual clinical trials data, adverse reaction data, as well as the monitoring and audit data, they're all in different places where collected by different standards, so that we can't really get to them. If we rethink how we do that, and use standards in order to drive the movement of information, of data from the electronic health records and our biological repositories, as well as from the electronic systems at sites and our various regulatory and oversight agencies and monitoring boards, we can create a virtual database. Doesn't all have to be one massive place, but we can by having standards, we can have the data aggregatable and usable in a way to support the kinds of analytics that we're talking about. If we think broadly about what the system might look like, and we'll be talking more about this in the workshop this afternoon, if we begin with a global network of sites where the study sites they're basically all the same in a generic sort of way, with site directors, investigators, coordinators, data systems, and so on. If those sites are operating according to standards within the areas of personnel, facilities, administration and finance, information technology, quality management, and so on, we put into place information systems at those sites. All of that information can flow through the pipe into a cloud-based, secured environment, which is basically existent within a federated trust framework, where every user has a verifiable, authenticatable identity, so that you can use that to define where people can go, what they can have access to, and track where they go as well. You can build into this, it all becomes a universal collaborative interface that allows all of the various stakeholder groups to acquire and access the information that's needed to do their particular jobs. So that information from electronic health records flows into the system. You can use the data in there to drive a dynamic accreditation process, as well as continuous quality improvement. And importantly, if you look over on the far right side, the ability to have the aggregated data according to standards such as the CDISC standards or the CareLex standards for the electronic trial master file, Safe Biopharma standards for information security and digital commerce, you can enable smart tools, new smart tools that actually use the kinds of sophisticated algorithms that I talked about before to achieve truly innovative results with respect to quality improvement, doing remote monitoring, remote auditing, and what I call real-time pharmacovigilance, where we can actually in real time be able to slice and dice the data in ways that allow us to truly identify signals that otherwise would be lost in the tremendous mountain, not haystack, but mountain of data that are there. But we can do this. We'll talk about this more later today. So I hope that sets a broad kind of framework for our discussions today in terms of challenging us to think beyond the way we do things today, to begin to think about how we can do them tomorrow if we have the will, because we certainly have the means. So we'll at that point turn it over. Who's next in the program? Angela? Thank you. Thank you very much.